section, this is where we're really getting into it. We're finna start learning some really valuable information. One of the hardest things to do is to make an adjustment on your unit and know what you're adjusting. So many times people, they want to know what are your settings? What are your settings? And what are you adjusting? I find it better if you make an adjustment to know what you're adjusting. I mean, you just don't go turning up the gain or turning down the gain or adjusting the TVG or the ghost tree or the noise reduction. You want to know color gain, color limit. You want to know what you're adjusting and how it affects the picture. Those are very important. That way, if you make an adjustment and it doesn't do what you want, you'll know where to go back to, start over. And if you're seeing lots of fuzz on the screen, you'll be able to go say, hey, that right there can be eliminated in a couple different ways. Let's try those ways. By knowing what your adjustments do, you'll be able to better dial in your unit. And that right there is going to give you the clearest possible picture, but give you the most detail at the same time, because that's what you're doing. You're walking that fine line of detail versus clarity. And by knowing what each adjustment does and each setting does, you'll be able to better dial in that unit. So let's dig into this and let's go through each one of them slowly, but let's go through them thoroughly. That way you'll know exactly what you're doing when you make an adjustment. All right, guys, in this section, let's talk about gain. What is gain? In order to make good adjustments, when you make adjustments on your fish finder, it's important to know what each adjustment is. So let's start with gain. What is gain? Gain is simply Garmin's word for sensitivity. And in the following video, you'll see how each adjustment in gain affects your picture. In this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each adjustment in gain. It'll be listed on the screen, and to show you how much adjusting gain does. This is 50% gain. As you can see, I've lost there is no ghost tree, there are no artifacts in the water, but it doesn't show any detail. I mean, you got a tree out there about 28 feet, and it just doesn't show up any much. So here I am, I bumped it up to about 55 gain, starting to see a few bait fish in the water at about 6 foot depth, out to about 25 feet. The tree's starting to show up, even starting to see some white perch at the bottom of that tree right there. And that's what we're looking for. But I like it a little bit more. So let's go ahead and make some more adjustments. Here's 60% gain. Now look at those bait fish start to show up. And now you start to see the white perch hiding in the trees. And even some bait fish right below the boat. This was a real windy day, so I was trying my best to stay on this while I was filming it. Now here we are bumping it up to 65, which is real close to what I consider optimal. But look at those large balls of bait fish starting to show up. You got the detail, but if you look up in the top left-hand corner of the screen, you're starting to see that the ghost tree, I guess what people call it, but that's not really ghost tree, but a lot of the artifacts in the water. Now we're up to 70%, and now 75, and you can see it's starting to blow the screen out, and the ghost tree is really taking effect. It starts at about 22 feet out and curves all the way down to about 10 feet. You can still see fish and game fish in there, but it's just not optimal. So I'm going to back it down to about 68 or so. What I feel is optimal for me on this body of water. It could be different on yours, because I like to see the detail in the water. All right, now we're going to move to TVG, time varied gain. What does TVG do? TVG stabilizes the returns on your unit. Now what does that mean? What that means is, for example, if a fish up high in the water column, the return will naturally be stronger because of the shorter distance between the transducer as it hits the fish and comes back. Well, as it gets into deeper water, that time takes longer. And so the return will be weaker. TVG stabilizes and equalizes those returns. So a 1 pound fish looks like a 1 pound fish, whether it's high in the water column or low in the water column. So let's take a look. All right, let's go straight into TVG, time varying gain. It'll be under your sonar setup menu, pretty easy to get to, and there you go. It's TVG. Right now we have it at off. Now, as we talked about right at the beginning, knowing what TVG does will help you make these adjustments better. The first thing we're going to do is I'm going to turn it all the way on high. Now, remember one thing. It is a computer filtering out. It doesn't know that a jig is a jig, particles in the water. It doesn't know that. It can't distinguish between it. It's doing simply what you've been told to do. So if you tell it to filter out at the highest rate possible, it's going to start filtering out everything. And it's kind of like noise reduction. Too much of a good thing. You know what I mean? So what I like to do is, and I'm going to show you what medium and low also does. Low is my preferred setting. Low helps clear up that upper left-hand corner window, but also what it does is it still allows your jig to show up. Now, you know, by understanding that, you know, returns at the top of the water column are always going to be stronger than returns at the bottom of the water column, and knowing that TVG equalizes those returns, then you'll understand what your adjustments you're actually trying to make. The reason it clears the screen up so much when you put it on, you know, say high or medium, something like that, is because you're telling it that a 1 pound fish is severely showing up large and almost not showing up at all. So it's going to really start filtering out those really small particles and making them, it's not filtering as much as it's trying to equalize and make small particles at the top look like small particles at the bottom and so forth. So it actually looks like it's filtering the screen when in effect it's just equalizing the returns. And you're telling it how much equalization it needs. I have found that, for example, right now it's off. And I'm going to put it on low right here. And look at that. Look how beautiful low cleans that picture up. Not too much, but still enough that you can still see a 32nd ounce jig. Now, when you get to medium, notice how everything kind of went black. Those small particles could be your jig in certain situations. And then high just filters out everything. It actually starts to filter out part of the bush that's down at the bottom right here. And when you start to filter out part of your bush, you absolutely know that it's going to filter out your jig. So always be looking for, you want to use on any adjustment the minimum that you can get away with, and that's going to create your best picture. Now, I have done this with the LVS 32 and the LVS 34, and they both seem to be very close in the adjustments they make. So if you have the LVS 34 and you have the LVS 32, I still recommend TVG low, but you still might want to take a look at medium or high, drop a jig down there and then get a feel for what you're seeing. So when you have it on high, that's a lot. So, okay, see, now here I have a jig put down. You can see the braided line. Now notice when I turned it off, that jig came back out of nowhere. So, all right, so we're going to go through each of these. I put it on low, the jig and the weight above it is still visible, but what did it kind of start to filter out was that braided line. Now, when you put it on medium, you'll see the bait, actually the weight above the bait starts to be filtered out, the line completely gone. All you're seeing now is the weight in the jig, and that may be right for you. But when you turn it on high, you see how it actually starts to filter out the bait and the weight. You can forget about seeing the braided line. That's not possible. And if you turn it all the way off, now you start to see, you're actually seeing some of the oxygen bubbles from the line moving through the water. See, that's a little bit too much, and that really starts to cloud your screen up. So my opinion, low is the perfect medium. All right, guys. In this section right here, what we're going to talk about is the ghost tree. Now, the ghost tree, as I've explained before, The ghost tree is simply the beams bouncing off a hard surface, which will be the bottom, and bouncing back at an angle. It's almost impossible to completely eliminate this. And what causes ghost tree is one beam comes and bounces up, another beam, and there are 5 beams, bounces and hits the bottom at a different angle and bounces away at a different angle, and that stair-step effect of all 5 beams bouncing creates what some people have called a tree, or the ghost tree. The tree is not there, but it shows up on your screen as kind of a ghost tree. It's been there from the beginning. I know there's a lot of people that will say, I didn't have this before the perspective mode update. You can actually go back and look at some of the first Garmin ads and see the resemblance of that ghost tree. But they tried to come out with a fix for it. So many people griped and complained about it. I don't go crazy worrying about it. It doesn't really bother me because I know what it is. It only seems to happen in shallow water. The deeper the water, the more it's eliminated, because those beams go down, they have further bounce back. So it happens a lot in shallower water. But they came up with a fix called the ghost tree reject. And it's low, medium, high. You have off, low, medium, high, and then you have auto. Now I have tried all of these, and the best way to say it is I just do not like it. I don't want the computer trying to eliminate things on the screen because it can't decipher between a bait and interference. So let's take a look at it. Let's see what it actually does, and then you'll be able to judge for yourself whether or not you want to use it. I personally do not use it. I'm not a big fan of it, never have been. So let's take a look at it right now. All right, guys, let's dive into this thing. What I'm trying to do is, this is, of course, is the same brush pile, one of my favorite brush piles. I'm trying to make sure that I get a jig into the picture, because when we're fishing, the jig being in the picture is important, because a lot of people want to see their weight. I always put a weight above my jig, that way you can see it better. The ghost tree usually happens in that 20-foot circle around it. So, that's where people white perch fish, do a lot of white perch fishing, and that's in that area where the ghost tree, the beams, they start to interact with each other. You get returns starting to hit, the beam's going out and it hits another beam, and that's where the ghost tree, for I guess in lack of a better term, people have come to it because it looks like a tree, come up with. So we started off on low, and what they do is by doing the ghost tree, they're taking some of the power and redirecting it from some of the down beams into more of the out beams, and that is supposed to take it where they're not colliding and creating the beam. What I have found by turning this on is it creates huge voids. As you can see right here, you see the lower part of the beam. And when I say lower part, from about straight under the boat out to about halfway. See how it's black there? It's filtering out a lot of the particles in the water, not by a filtering process, but because it's directing most of its power toward the forward beam. So you got more power going toward forward beam and less going down. Look at the jig. See how the line shows up about halfway down, and then it starts to filter out or go away when it gets closer to the jig and the weight. Now, I don't really want, if I'm going to get it to show up, I don't want half my screen being filtered and half of it not. And now we're going to turn this, actually we're going to go ahead and turn it all the way off. Now off is no filtering. That's equal power to all the beams. And when you turn it to low, it directs a little bit more power toward the forward shooting beams and a little bit less. And you can see it in the picture. Look at halfway up. You see more interference or more noise in the water. And then the lower portion, less noise. But look at that jig right there. See that line showing up down to about the halfway point? And then when it gets to the halfway point, not as much, the line's not showing up as well. Now this is, as we turn it to medium, really look at that. Now we're really starting, jig still showing up well, but it's starting to really filter out. Now when you turn it to high, this is where it gets crazy. I don't know what it does on high, because it's supposed to be redirecting the power toward the forward, but all it looks like to me is it takes 90% of the power and shoots it in that very top beam, which is literally aiming at the water surface and out. So, and then the other parts doesn't have any kind of return at all. Me personally, I hate it. I turn it off and I use the noise reject and the TVG to control my picture. All right, now let's take a look at noise control. Now, noise control, what you're asking the fish finder to do is to filter out small returns or noise in the water. That noise can come from trolling motors, electronics, and things like that. But remember, as you're using noise control, which is very useful, you're also asking the unit to filter out some returns. Now, those returns could be your 32nd ounce crappie jig, or it could be your spinnerbait coming by a tree. So be careful in overusing the noise control feature, because you don't want to go too far and then just start to filter out the things that you really want to see. All right, we're going to start with the noise in off position, and now we're turning it to high. The reason I wanted you to see high is to see how much it clears it up. Now, one thing about high is, to me, it makes the movements real milky. Now, the screen is extremely clear. Now we're going to go to low. Now we're in very shallow water, so the effects of having it on low are going to be a little bit less than, say, normal. But I gotta say that medium looks like to be an excellent in between. It's got a really nice clear picture, but you don't have that super milky movement. And here we go again. I put it back on high where you can see it. See, the movement is real milky, almost like the fish and the bait fish are in molasses. And that is not, to me, it's not real natural, and your bait movement won't be real natural. So high is not my choice. I'm more of a low to medium guy, just depending on how it looks on a particular day. Some days low looks really good, and that has a lot to do with the particles in the water, and some days medium is your best choice. All right, now let's talk about color gain. Color gain is simply this. It is the brightness at which your colors show up. So if you put it at 100 color gain, it will pop. It makes all your brightness on a pretty much the same level. There's no contrast to your returns. So the brighter you get it, yes, the fish will pop, the bait will pop, but you have to be cautious about this because you start to lose some of the detail and the fine detail. So if you got it on 100 gain in a brush pile, you don't want that, because then everything starts to blend together and pop together. So be careful with color gain. I say with crappie, you may not want to use as much as you use with bass. So let's take a look at that. All right, color gain is simply controls how bright your returns show up on the screen. Gain is sensitivity. Color gain has a lot to do with how much a bait pops and things like that, essentially showing the brightness on the screen. Now remember one thing, the brighter you set your color gain, because it pops so much it kind of blows out, the more you're going to lose your detail because everything is beginning to be blown out. So there's a fine line that we walk when doing this. This is down there with color gain very, very low. You can still see the bait. You can still see the trees. But notice how everything is kind of dull. There's not a lot of vibrance in the screen and things like that. But what we're going to do, and that was on the color gain at 2%. Now we're going to go up to about 50%. Notice the hues of the amber. They're a lot better, a little bit more vibrant color. Everything's still going to show up about the same. This is a kind of a default setting. I don't use this. I want to go to the higher end of the spectrum. Now notice the bait still showing up wonderful coming through there, but it can be kind of hard to pick up. Now, I don't want to have to struggle to pick up my bait on the screen. So I have learned to go into the 80 to 100 range. It is just kind of a thing that I've grown to like the brighter returns. Now, I don't want to go too high, especially crappie fishing. You don't want to go too high because, like I said, it'll blow out the picture. But right here, I'm throwing an A-rig. This is a bass situation. Notice the baits are popping. The fish are popping. The tree is popping. You can see a lot, but this is more open water. This is not fishing in cover and on structure. You're trying to see the bait. You're trying to see the fish. But look how beautiful that bait is coming back through the water. Now, but I've noticed, say, for crappie fishing, that I believe 80 is probably your best way. And that being that you still get good pop from your bait, and you still get good pop from the fish, but it doesn't blow out the picture and start to affect the target separation and the detail of the bush and things like that. So there's always a fine line and a happy medium. But I got to tell you, when you're out there throwing an A-rig in open water, you may want to jack that color gain up to 100% because that way you can get that fine detail. You can see I threw it 3 or 4 times out here. Look at those fish pop. Now, notice the little bit of fuzz in the water. You can actually see the resemblance of a ghost tree. That's okay. You're not trying to get the perfectly clear picture. You're wanting to get all the detail. Look at the oxygen bubbles as I yank that bait back through the zone. So that's what we're looking for. That's what you're trying to attain. I would say that 80 is your best color gain color for crappie, and I would even creep to the 90 to 100 range for open water bass fishing, but then maybe stay in that 80 range for fishing, say, brush tops and things like that. Even for bass. So 80 for structure and cover, open water, I'm going to use 90 to 100. That way you can make your bait pop and, make the fish pop also. All right, color limit. Man, when it first came out, it was such a controversial addition to the Garmin units. And what they were trying to do is find ways to clean up the picture. But I have always been one of the ones that says, I don't mind a little fuzz in order to see what I want to see. And as we've got a few updates away, I'm got to the point where I don't even use color limit. Color limit, to me, I put it on 0, but you may want to use it. But essentially what color limit is doing is taking away, it's kind of like a color gain, but it's taking away all your different hues of your colors and simply making them black and white. And so by doing that, you filter out a lot of the particles in the water. Yes, the picture will get clearer, but man, you lose detail. You lose the fine detail of being able to see the fine baits. I'm not a big fan of it, and I don't use it very much. All right, now what color limit does is essentially takes away the hues of each color, essentially turning the screen to a black and white image. Now with color limit on 0, you're gonna see here lots of small bait fish. You can see fish swimming around. You can see the bait very cleanly come back to the boat. I'm throwing an A-rig in this picture just to really show you that, man, when it comes in, you can literally see it splash there about 40 foot, comes down. You see a lot of fish in the water column. You see the bait very good. You can actually see separation between the front of the bait and actually the actual swim baits on it. Now, that is what you're looking for. That's why I use 0 to this day. But let's take a look at the other color limits. That way you can decide for yourself what's the best. So I'm going to turn the color limit to 50. Now, when you turn it to 50, not much changes. The background gets a little blacker because it's filtered out just a little bit of those lighter returns. The bottom got a little bit brighter because the bright returns got wider. Still see the bait coming there about 40 feet, reeling it through here. There's really nothing that, in my opinion, I think there's better ways to filter the screen than using the color limit. Like I said, I don't use it at all. You can still see the bubbles right there as I jank the bait up to make another cast. But now when we go to 100% color limit, what it does is it filters out anything that's not the strongest return, essentially making everything black and white. Now notice, very hard to see the bait hit the water. Very hard to catch it coming back. And even when it's coming back, it's blinking. That's because it's on the edge of the beam, and those small or not as strong returns don't show up as bright. And that is why it's blinking, because if it's not in the center of the beam, you're not going to see it on the screen. All right, guys, in this section, as we've dialed in, we really know what all our settings are. We know, what the settings do when you adjust them. But one of the things that can really help put your unit kind of over the hump of being just amazing, and that is focus. When it comes from the factory, it will come as auto fresh. There are 3 different settings: auto fresh, auto salt, and then you have a manual setting where you can adjust your focus. Now, what is actual focus? You have 5 beams, and those beams don't always line up perfectly. If you've ever looked at your bottom and seen kind of a stair-step stagger where the bottom is not perfectly straight, that means your beams are out of line. So you can go into this feature, into the focus feature, and when you go in there, you can adjust it up and down manually to perfectly align it. Now, by perfectly aligning it, you're going to assure that your rays are not overlapping or anything like that. And by not overlapping, you'll help reduce the ghost tree effect as much as you possibly can, and you're going to get a cleaner, crisper picture. So let's take a look at that right now. It's a great feature and something a lot of people don't even know about. All right, guys. This particular thing is called focus. Now, focus, it comes on auto fresh or auto salt, depending on where you set this up. This is something that I suggest you do to fine tune your Livescope as good as possible. There have been a few that I have turned on as I'm doing my lessons where I've seen the focus is perfect, but not many. But what we do is, along the bottom of the screen, this is where your focus comes in. You have 5 different beams, and they're aimed downwards. Now, what you're doing by your focusing is you're actually changing the direction of those beams just slightly so they line up better. On my particular unit, about 145 is absolutely perfect. You know, there's not any seams or beam stitching areas where the bottom is, or at least as best as I can possibly do it. But when you move it to 0 or all the way up, to the very top, up to about 255, you'll notice that the beam stitching areas will begin to be staggered. They will begin to, overlay each other a little bit. And when you do that, you're not going to get the best picture, and it's also going to amplify your ghost tree return. So we're going to take a look as we're going through this, it's very important that this is a fine tuning. It's not going to fix everything. Now notice as I dropped it to 0, we're going to go from one extreme to the other, and then we're going to go to 255. Notice how those beam stitched areas are not even. They're not perfect. And so what I suggest you do is get out in deep water. Get out in deep water where you've got the wind's not blowing, and you've got a very good lock on the bottom. And then slowly adjust your focus back and forth until you get a perfectly clean and perfectly straight bottom where all the beams line up perfectly. Now, some people's, like I said, I've had a few where auto fresh or auto salt was money, and they lined up perfectly. But that has not been the case on most every single unit that I have that I've ever tested with or have been on the water doing classes. But you notice as I move it from 0 to 255, notice that those beams changing the angle in which they're lining up. And that's what you're doing. You're trying to get the perfect lineup. And when you get it perfectly tuned, that's going to help. First of all, it's going to help with dead spots. And then secondly, it's going to help with the ghost tree, because if we know a ghost tree is simply a reflection of one of the beams. It's hitting a hard bottom and reflecting up at an angle. And so if you can make sure that your beams are perfect, that will eliminate it. Now let's talk about how I set my depth. For forever and ever, the consensus was to take your depth at about 3 feet to the bottom. Say if you're in 20 foot of water, put the depth on 23. That way you maximize your screen. Well, after a lot of research and a lot of on the water testing, and I didn't come up with this on it's my own. I've looked at a bunch of different videos, and I've watched and spent a lot of time on the water. And I will say this: I take the depth and I add about 10 foot. So let's get into that, and we'll talk about why I do that. But I am just of the belief that it creates a better picture. All right, let's get into this, because forever and ever, when you first chose depth, I mean, it's how I was taught. Everybody always said, take your depth, whatever that may be, and in this case, about 11 foot. You would set it on, say, 14 foot. Add about 2 to 3 foot, and that would maximize your screen. Well, one thing we have found through time, or at least I have, and seen from some of the best forward-facing sonar anglers in the world, is that that's not necessarily the best way. The Livescope transducer is a chirp-style transducer, and it gives power based on the depth in which it thinks you're in. For example, if you tell it you're in 14 foot of water, it'll give you 14 foot of power. It gives you the amount of power that it needs, that it thinks it needs to make a good picture. But what I have found, and this is not only my idea, I've seen this, and in one angler in particular, he uses it to the best of the degree, is to take your depth and add about 10 feet. Now, this will cut down on your screen size. But one thing that I have noticed by cutting down on your screen size is you're asking the unit, for example, if you're in 11 foot of water, you're telling the unit you're in 21 foot of water, so it's going to give more power. Now, by giving more power, you're going to get better detail, better target separation, and a cleaner picture. That is something that we're all striving for. Now, when you for example, as I go up and down, the particles in the water will appear. It gets a lot fuzzier. The screen gets a lot fuzzier. But secondly, it also blows the screen out. If you're in 11 foot and you put it on 13, everything looks big and blown out. By putting it on 11 foot, if you're in 11 foot of water, putting it on about 20, 21 foot depth, what it does is it's going to clean the picture up. The fuzz will kind of clean up by two ways. It's making it smaller on the screen, but you're also increasing the power, which will help kind of blast through the algae and things in the water. So it's kind of a two-way door. You actually gain two things by doing this. And then I have noticed that not only do I get better detail with my jigs and my baits, and the fish will actually get better detail, I'm going to get better target separation around, say, trees and brush piles and things like that. As you'll see as I'm going down, notice how that bottom got fuzzier, and it wasn't as crisp. But then when you go up, that bottom's a lot more crisp. You can actually see a fish at about 26 foot right here swimming. You can actually see the swimming action of the fish. And then when you put that down to, say, 2 or 3 feet below the surface, you can still see the fish, but look at the bottom. Look how it's not as crisp. Look, it's fuzzier. You also notice the particles in the water appear more. And I have just found that it's better. Now, even, I used to think that this was only for a bass fishing thing, but over time I have found it to be an everything thing. It creates a better picture, and that has a lot to do with the chirp style transducer. And I know you're going to give up a little bit of your screen size, but trust me, what you give up in screen size is well worth the advantages that you're going to gain in detail, target separation, and crispness of your picture. And by doing that way you can actually take color gain and noise reduction, TVG, and use those to clean up your picture even more.